Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You know, this week is we're going to do some archaeology of the soul. I want you to think about your image of God as you've grown up. I mean, most of us started with that Michelangelo version, which is the bearded old man. Well, many of us had him on a throne with a big old crown. And you know, as we evolve, as we develop, we begin to see God as a kind of Santa Claus figure. You know, you better be good. And when we really look at our images of God and what we settle on, a lot of that has to do with our family of origin. I mean, why do you think Jesus saw God as Father? You see, Jesus was the son of a woman who was pregnant out of wedlock. And Joseph not only married her, but raised Jesus as his very own. He adopted the bastard son as his own. That was really unusual at the time. Our image of God and how we evolve and how we develop and how we move from these images, if you will, these things that children can draw. And I'll tell you, if you want to go somewhere, go online and just look at the pictures that children draw of God. They're wonderful. Lots of rainbows and clouds. I remember one of my favorite things was my mom didn't like Catholicism for reasons of her own, and my dad was Catholic. And when we go and visit my dad's family, they would all have these little Catholic medals around their neck. And I was so jealous. And so my cousin gave me one, and it was the Ascension of Jesus going into the clouds. And that was I wore that. My mom didn't like me wearing it, but she didn't make me take it off. And, you know, I was a kid. I was 7 years old, 8 years old. We evolve, don't we? So today, what I want us to see is look at your own layers of understanding and your vision of God through your life. I mean, it is like an archaeological dig here. I mean, think of the Hindu gods. The first gods were river gods. They lived on the river. The river gave them life. Think of how the natives took the buffalo, Wankantanka, the sacred spirit, and turned it into holy because it gave them everything. It gave them their teepees. It gave them their bowls. It gave them their clothes, everything. So today we're going to look at our images of God, how they've expanded, or maybe not, because I'll be honest, I know some dogmatists who are still living in these, what I would call adolescent at best images of God, where God is still a punisher. If you have authoritarian parents, God is going to be a judge, and you have to work through that. So, Bob and Marianne, I'd like to welcome you all. And Marianne, let's start with you. When we talk about this changing God in our mind, where do you go in your head, in your heart?
Well, I think, I think it's really important that, yes, God has to evolve and change just as we evolve and change, because if God is static, then we are static. And the way that we see the world becomes static. It becomes a thing rather than a process. And so where I go with God is, for me, I mean, I always liked the Jewish conception of God, where it was something that was unnameable. And you could not even say the name of God, because once you do that, then you are imposing something on God that may or may not exist, and it's something that you're creating. You know, the whole idea of we create our own gods, that's very true, because it's our perceptions that are of God is going to shape our perceptions of the world and the way we interact. So for me, God is it's a process. It's something, I think the word is laden with lots of baggage that we have to kind of find a new way to talk about this, because God is beyond I think it's beyond our language, and it's something that is very much growing in each of us, whether we recognize it or not.
Amen. And I think you can see that more in the East than the West. If you look at how the Vedanta moved from river god and they got consolidated, and it eventually turns into Buddhism, which is kind of where you reflect, and Taoism, which also gets integrated in there, which is the God that can be named is not the God. So I think we're on track to our own evolution. Bob, how about you?
Well, like most other topics that we discuss, the first thing that occurs to me is a paradox. And having studied psychology most of my life, I know that there is a hardwired element of human existence that causes us to develop images of things. We see things in the clouds. We see things in paint stains. We see things on a piece of toast. And it's a perfectly natural thing. It's part of the way our nervous system works. But at the same time, I'll go back, Marianne mentioned the Jewish tradition. You go back and the very first thing God says to Moses is, don't have any gods before me. Don't try and think of an image of me. Moses asks him straight out, what are you? Who are you? And he said, I am that I am. So here we are, humanity again, caught in this paradox where we're wired to want to make an image. It's not even wanting to. We can't help ourselves. Yet the first commandment that we are given, at least in the Jewish tradition, and of course in Taoism likewise, is don't try and make an image. So that's where we have the whole idea of idols. And as soon as we try and lock onto any image, we're actually worshiping an idol because an image cannot capture what is really God. So it's this paradox that we're riding all the time. And we even knew it, because you go back historically and you look at various rituals like in Babylonia and Assyria, where the king had to play the role of the god in certain rituals. Now, they knew the king wasn't God, and I mean, even the king would say he was, but he knew he wasn't. He was playing a role, and that was part of his duty to go through this act to bring the rain, to bring the crops and so forth.
Yeah.
But at the same time he was doing that, he knew he was riding this paradox.
And I think what we're identifying that God is a projection. And so we have to say, what is God a projection of? And to me, there is this quality of becoming, and it's a connection for us. And at that place of, I have defined, and Matthew Fox said this beautifully, we need new images of God where God is in motion. The wind, a bird in flight, the river, things that are, how do we begin to image God as a verb and not a thing? And Marianne, you had mentioned this in your opening statement, God is a process. And it's like, how do you stay at the growing edge of that process and allow yourself to be defined and your own understanding of that holy presence to be redefined in a way that makes it more, not just palatable, but more connective, that there's more connective tissue to our neighbors with empathy and differentiation and complexification. Go ahead, Marianne.
Well,
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I was going to say our relationship with God has been basically transactional in the past. You mentioned the kings and they were performing a role. So they had a job to do. So our gods had a job to do. They needed to protect us. They needed to smite our enemies. They needed to do whatever it was they needed to do. And I think what we're moving to is more of a transformational kind of God, where it's not something, Bertrand, is that his name? Russell, the philosopher, he he believed that that human beings believe what suits us. And I think the same thing holds true for God. So we believe in a God that serves our purposes. And I think that's what we have to move away from.
Yeah.
God is not here to serve us. We are here to serve all of life. And is God the word that we're using for all of life?
Yeah. And let's look at kind of the development, okay? Because there are these developmental aspects, and you can go to developmental aspects of faith. But really, I want to talk about this piece. You know, when we first learn of God, it's the old bearded dude like Santa whose lap we can sit on, and he can be our friend. And we think concretely of this God. And as we move, and that's kind of like grades 1st through 3rd, somewhere in there. And then between 4th and 6th grade, we begin to see God in human terms, and we can start drawing pictures of God. This is where obedience comes in. You know, the whole concept of, you know, when the Catholics, what's that called, Marianne, when a Catholic is 7 years old? It's not christening, but confirmation.
Oh, confirmation.
Yeah, confirmation. It's like the church puts the child on their knee and says, "You're 7 years old now. You're old enough to know the difference between good and bad, and you're going to be held accountable." Same thing happens in the bar mitzvah for a child around 12 or 13. But God becomes this thing. Now, another piece of this, one of my favorite pictures of a child drawing God is God as a superhero redhead. And it was a beautiful picture of God as this flaming redhead by a 6th grader. It was just beautiful. And a lot of people still see God as this superhero that comes in. I know people who see God as the superhero who's going to help them find a parking place during Christmas season. You know, this is how trivial and how regressive.
That's when I know God's on my side.
Yeah, but I want us to see that these are projections. And the projections are coming from different layers of ourself, all the way up to, you know, God ends up not being close when we get into the junior high years. God becomes more distant. God is the God of stories. This is where the plan comes in. This is where the order we see, we put on God. And again, Jesus becomes God's son. Before that, Jesus is God. Think about that connection there. And then as we get into our senior years, God becomes less anthropomorphic, you know, more spirit. And now I want us to think about process, because if we're developing properly, and I think the East did that better than the West, although the West is coming along, it's a mystery that binds us together. God becomes personal. And I take it all personally. God's love is a two-way street. Marianne, you talked about our connection to other people. I think that connection to other people is the very presence of this holy movement that cannot be put in your pocket. So I want us to see that we each go through these understandings. And some of us, and this is, you know, Freud's psychosexual stuff. This is psycho-spiritual stuff. People get stuck at different stages, and I want us to honor those stages, but I also want us, and I want to invite us to help people come in to a new and broader understanding of getting rid of the golden calves that we can hold, and seeing that it's about participating in a movement that is not only all around us, but literally is us. And this is where, to me, the Buddha and Lao Tzu come in, because they make it very clear. You are the Tao. I am the Tao. Each of us is. Now, explain who you are. You'll have as much trouble doing that as you will explaining the Tao. It cannot be done. Believe me, we've been trying now for how many years? So that's my two-bit. It's a projection. We do need to find new images of God. I think the Taoism offers a huge opportunity for us to move beyond an image that is something that we can, make on a 3D printer, and make it something that is the 3D printer itself moving. I don't know how to Maybe I just came up with a new image of God. Any comments? I mean, I just laid out a whole. I mean, life is a Rice-Sauer test, and I think God is too.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And I often think about Jesus calling God Father. I think Joseph is overlooked. By Joseph marrying that young girl, a pregnant one in that time, was so scandalous. And, what I can once say about Jesus is his beginning was scandalous and his end was scandalous. But through the whole thing, he saw God as someone who would adopt anyone, even those who were the worst sinners according to society's understanding.
Well, I've often thought about Joseph too, and who knows? Maybe Joseph thought he was the father. Who knows? But anyway, that's a whole nother.
Or was it a Roman soldier
of,
rape, which is the one I get over and
right,
over?
Or it's a whole nother line of inquiry. But you were talking about the golden calves and that kind of thing, and I think that for me, those kind of images are the things that we place in front of us that control our lives other than something spiritual. So our money, our prestige, our jobs, even our families, look at me, I have the perfect family, and those are the kind of, I see those things as those false idols. But when it comes to projections of God, I think that, again, if we can't discern from our own teachings. So all of those things that you laid out with the progression of a child and the way they see God, they were taught those things. So by the time you're in second or third grade, you were taught something as a child. And so those are the things that you are forming. And so I think that's why it's so important that we really examine what we're teaching, what we believe, because our beliefs are what shape the way we interact with the rest of the world.
And most of it, Marianne, though, is unconscious. I mean, we're talking family of origin stuff,
absolutely,
and it's not something that's intentional. And so we have to address it at a deeper level. It's not we need to do this. I think it's more like the Tao. We need to reroute the Tao into a new understanding. And it will do what it needs to do because I don't think.
Read.
Right. Well, and that's where therapists are so important in our culture right now.
Boy, no
because
kidding.
they can help people redirect. And so when I say need, I think as we go forward, it's just like, we need to invite the Tao into our lives. So, but how do you do that? If you were taught that is evil, that's something that you can't. I had to go through, so I was raised Catholic, and I was one of those kids that believed everything I was taught. I was hook, line, and sinker, into all of that. And the extrication that I had to go through in order to separate myself out from that, you're right. A lot of it there was a lot of unconscious behaviors, but there was a lot of really hard things. And I do not take it lightly. When someone is told they're being chased by the devil, there is a very real fear there. And there is a very, very hard process to be able to see that in a different way. And I don't think we can do it on our own.
No.
Really do.
And what you're talking about is what I call the gravity well of the soul. I mean, how do you get outside the gravity of that understanding so that you can expand? And I've known a lot of young people who started as in dogmatic families, and the journey coming out of that has been just totally amazing. But we don't need to call it the Tao. It's got a name in other language, spiritus, breath, wind. These are also words that connote this movement that is moving among us, shaping us by not doing a damn thing. It's just flowing all around us and through us, and how we appropriate it. So I think as we evolve into that stage where God is no longer an anthropomorphic projection, but becomes this movement, we can start addressing that movement. And I think this is what, Richard Rohr, even, Maharishi was trying to do this, that there's this flow coming through us, and we can actually, I call it the holy presence. There's a point where you can feel yourself moving with it. And it's not something that it's not like a long wave you get to ride. It's more like a moment where you see that it's moving in and out of you, and you I don't know, pray, you lean to move more consciously with that movement. And again, I see it as a quality of becoming, and we each have it. People say they don't believe in God anymore, and I go, yeah, you just believe in a different God. I don't give a damn whether it's golf, sex, or the love that dances between you and your children. You hold something of high esteem and a quality of being, and that's what our images of God have tried to hold for us as we've grown. Again, a small child, my grandkid, he likes to pray at meals because he likes to say hooray at the end, and he has no idea what it means, but he knows it makes the meal a little special. That's as far as he's gotten with it. So anyway, that's my 2-minute response to the Tao and how do we talk about it. I think when I'm with a Christian, I talk about the spirit. I talk about the word where it comes from, spiritus, which is breath. And I don't know. Maybe.
Well, and I think it goes beyond just us. It encompasses all of life and nature. And I think that's something that we have to also bring into this. It's not our God. It is the God. God is everything. And so, and then that gets us into the whole planetary discussion on what we're doing there. But anyway, Bob, you were going to say something, sorry.
Well, Ernest Becker talks about this whole thing in terms of power. He talks about the dilemma we're in as thinking beings and how we are forced to see ourselves as isolated from nature because we are separate. We have a separate viewpoint because we're conscious. And he lays out a number of things that we can look beyond ourselves and give away our power to those entities, whether it be our family, our nation, the idea of humanity, the idea of spirituality. And in all of those cases, we are projecting, and that's a great word that you used, Red Hawk. We are projecting a need in ourselves to grasp something beyond ourselves that we can dedicate, for want of a better word, that we can give ourselves over to. And all of these different images that you've been talking about as we move through our maturation process and as culture moves through our maturation process is all tied in the same way to our need to have something to latch onto that's bigger than ourselves.
And that continues on beyond us. And I think that gets back to that basic fear that we have of annihilation and death. And so God can give us some way to extend ourselves as well.
Yeah. And I think what you all are talking about is humans are in a unique position of not being, we're conscious. So our connections become conscious, and our inability to not connect becomes conscious. When an animal gets sick, it doesn't know what's going on to it. It can't talk about dis-ease. It can't talk about homeostasis. It can't talk about all the little boundaries that are out of kilt. We can. So we see how we're moving and oscillating in and out of this movement. And we've tried to lay that out in our holy trinity of truth, love, and justice, that the human consciousness is going somewhere. And here's the thing I want to lay out before we burn up our half hour. I want to invite, we would like to have a little listeners panel at some point. If you're a listener, especially, if you're in a foreign country, I'd love to hear from you. Write me at redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. And we'd love to form a little group to do an extended deep end with some of our listeners. So I put that invitation out there. And we're kind of coming to the end of our time already. I'll tell you, I wonder if I really looked at it, how many times God has changed in my own mind during this episode. And I hope, and as I tend my own evolution, that I can find smaller and smaller increments of my projection and debriefing my projection to a quality of my own being that can shift and change towards greater health and wholeness. So, final words, Marianne. I'll do to Bob first. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I think that what it all boils down to is trying to align ourselves with this greater movement. And we've talked about the signposts, and we've talked about the rules of the road, and we've talked about a lot of these things. But if we can more comfortably align ourselves with whatever we have evolved into thinking of as this greater movement that we're a part of, then it is going to make this journey a lot easier for us.
Amen. Marianne?
Yeah, I would just say that I think that the way that we view God, the way our beliefs, and yes, they're always changing, really is fundamental to what we are going to go out there and create in the world. And I think if we can see God as something that is living within us and that living through us, whatever you want to call it, spirit or the Tao or whatever it is, that we are shaping the world. And when we can come from a place that benefits not just us, but benefits others as well, we are going to create the kind of world that we all want to live in.
Amen. Amen. Something I've been wanting to address for a while is I want to go back to America, because right now America's heart is really, really hurting. I'm telling you. And I want to talk about the two Johns. And the two Johns have each given us a philosophy of democracy. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about the dance between equality, equity, and freedom, and how they have to tug and pull on each other, but they have to be dancing together for us to be whole. Those two ideas are funded by the two Johns. You see, America is not a place at all. It's an idea. And we forget this. We keep wanting to build idols. I mean, we're turning our military into an object of worship. Think about that. America is split right now. The two Johns own us. What are they? Liberty and equity. Oh, my friends, what a conversation we're going to have. We hope you'll join us. And again, let us know who you are at redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. God's peace.